Hello friends, here we are with Marilú Santos. And one of the things that we wanted to do in our sessions of the making of Volverte a Abrazar, it's to expand on the team behind the videos and the technical stuff and how people interact and work within the frame of how we express the message. As you know, we did our song is in Spanish, and we did English captions to it, and we're working in another language's caption. Trust us, so that's coming down the pipe really soon. But one thing that was in Nani's heart, by the way, she's not here today because she chickened out because we were going to speak English, and she's better. She's like, what? Yeah, and she's more comfortable in Spanish, but that's coming. You're gonna see more of her too. But one of the things that was in Nani's heart was to have a sign language interpretation of the song. And that's when Marilú comes in, and she is going to be with us. And I just want you to know who she is, to get to know her. She's a fantastic human being. We're not going to talk about all the wonderful things that she is to us and for us, because the video is not going to be enough. But we're going to focus on the amazing ministry that God has given her in the talent of interpreting for the deaf community. So, Marilú, welcome to this video.
Thank you.
How do you feel about being interviewed? And
I feel honored. I feel God is doing what He needs to do, and He's kind of pushing me into places that I didn't expect.
That's always
but
true.
I'm following His call, I guess.
Amen and amen. Fantastic. Okay, so first, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit of the journey that started it all? How did it start? How you got involved in this type of ministry and in the skill of being able to interpret?
As far as sign language, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. I started signing many years ago. My son was born on the autism spectrum, and so the doctors told me that he was not going to be able to speak. He was going to be low functioning and nonverbal, and I didn't know what that meant or what that looked like. I knew I wanted to communicate with my son. So when they tell you he's nonverbal, how do I communicate with someone that's nonverbal? So I was kind of overwhelmed with that. And long story short, I met a church in Kissimmee that had all deaf, and I figured, I know Jesus, I know the Bible, so I can read the Bible. And I just went and I sat there and I looked at the Bible, and I looked at the person signing, and I looked at the Bible, and slowly I was able to grasp it, because I wasn't looking to learn a language as much as I was learning to communicate. That was my goal. So in learning to communicate, I was picking up the language as I was going. So that's how I learned sign language. I was learning it so that I can learn it there and then bring it home so I can teach my son and communicate with my son, because that was the ultimate goal, was communication.
And how did that work for him?
It was great. My son didn't speak till he was almost 4, but I was able to communicate with him. He didn't use spoken language, but I was able to communicate, which was my whole focus. And using sign language allowed him to communicate, but eventually he started to speak.
So did he learn enough for him to have like a conversation or something like that?
I wouldn't say a full conversation per se, but I would say he would communicate his wants and his needs. So in using sign language, he was able to express himself so efficiently that eventually he was able to speak and have a full conversation. And until today, he's 16, and today he still uses sign language, especially when he feels overwhelmed and there's a lot of people and he can't really do much. He'll just start signing to express his need, so he'll automatically default back to sign language.
That's amazing. So what would you say would be the catalyst that, I don't know, maybe you share about it because it's all related to your son, but what would be the catalyst that you would say that propel you to say, I have to do this, like more like a career or ministry like you've done so far?
Yeah, there is a moment. I was at a church interpreting. Well, I was invited to a lock-in for the youth, and someone knew that I knew sign language, and there was a 12-year-old boy there, and she was like, can you please come interpret? And I said, I'm not an interpreter. I just know how to sign to my son. That's it. And so she invited me to go that night to interpret for that child who was 12 years old. And so I went and I interpreted, and that little boy asked me, can you come to church tomorrow? And I was like, okay. So I went on Sunday, And I did the best that I could. I was not an interpreter. I just knew how to sign. So at the end of the service, he was so engaged, and he was like, "Can you come next Sunday?" And I was like, "Okay, so I'll go next Sunday."
And this is not your church?
No, not my church at all. And then the third Sunday, he was like, "Can you come again next week?" And I was like, "Do you have a plan?" But what really impacted me was that one day the pastor, she was preaching, and she was preaching in Spanish. So I'm listening to it in Spanish as I'm putting it in English on my mouth, and I'm signing at the same time.
Whoa.
But what was so impacting that changed my life was that she was talking about Genesis, and she was talking about the creation. And at the moment I was interpreting that she said he created the trees and he created all these different things, that little boy stopped me and he was like, "Wait a minute, God created trees?" And I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "What do you mean? That means he made the wood and he made all these different things," and he's asking me questions as the pastor's still preaching. So that moment, I had to make the decision. Do I keep interpreting what the pastor is saying, which the 12-year-old is for the first time being able to understand what the scriptures are saying. So at that moment, I had to make that decision to just explain to him Genesis 1.
Wow.
And at that moment, it was so impacting to me because he understood that God made a tree, as simple as a tree. And he was like, "Well, God made the tree, that means he made the wood, which makes the desk that I use at school and the paper that I use to write." And he used all of that from Genesis 1. So that moment to me it was a pivotal moment, knowing that I was able to that God used me as a vehicle to bring creation to a 12-year-old boy who's been born and raised in church, and no one was able to communicate that simple message to him.
That's phenomenal.
So
that's
changed
amazing.
Changed my life from there on.
Changed mine too. That's for sure. So, what would you say has been a challenge that you have to overcome to do something like this? What would be challenges that you face along the way?
As far as ministry or interpreting?
Well, interpreting or ministry, exactly the things that you love about signing.
The challenge that I would say, the biggest challenge is that people don't understand that there's a difference between signing or learning sign language and interpreting. Understanding that just because someone puts their hands up doesn't necessarily mean that the message is clear. Or trying to tell families that it's important to sign, it's important to communicate without offending them, without having their feelings hurt.
So how does that happen? How do they get offended because you try to sign?
Well, a lot of the times is like you go, let's say for example, Thanksgiving. You have a Thanksgiving and everyone's talking, you have a deaf person that's there, everybody automatically assumes, "Oh, they understand, oh yeah, they understand, and they read
lips or whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly, they'll say they read lips and things like that, and a lot of the time they miss the jokes, they miss the family history, they missed all of that because they're like, "Oh, they get it, don't worry." And so, which is fine, it is what it is, but sometimes I try to encourage, like, you know what, you should sign, try to communicate, enter into their world instead of them always having to enter into our world. And I felt that challenge with myself, with my son. I was the only one that was able to communicate, so I wanted to teach my family, I wanted to teach people that would deal with him to communicate so they can, because he couldn't enter into our world, so I was trying to enter into his world. So I try to bring that over into the deaf community, into the families, because a lot of these deaf individuals, they don't have a lot of people in their family that sign. They're the only deaf person. So their access to family history, their access to what's happening in their homes and in their church is very limited to whoever is able to give them that. So a lot of the time, the deaf community will automatically connect and relate to an interpreter, or will be relating more with deaf people because they can communicate, because at the end of the day, that's what they want to do.
So a lot of assumptions out there of the deaf people. What would you say would be a lesson or lessons that you've learned by overcoming these challenges?
Lessons that I've learned is that we as humans, we evolve, our minds evolve, the language evolves, and that everyone has a story. Everyone has a story, and every story is important. And every person, even if they put some type of effort is effort, and we have to acknowledge that. Yeah. So I've learned to not be quick to feel, quick to think, quick to make judgments, but to understand that I was in a place where no one understood me at a time, once upon a time. So to be able to understand that and learn to just be patient and be still and to try, even if it's a little bit. Any effort is some effort.
That's awesome, because people feel valued and that they're important, they matter.
Right.
So I know that you have I'm very proud to say this. You have an amazing ministry. What you've done in our church, in Faith Assembly of God in Orlando, Florida, has been nothing short of outstanding, a miracle. So much so that there are other churches that look up to us and trying to find what are we doing to minister to the deaf community. Let me ask you this: if you would have a time machine, what would you do differently when starting in the ministry, or starting what you have done with the community also, because it's not just the church, you've been doing other stuff. What would you have done differently?
The first thing I would do differently is I would start with a team, because when I started not only in the ministry, but when I started in the nonprofit that I have in the community, I felt I wanted to help everybody.
Yeah.
So I got burnt out very quickly because I have a passion, and because everyone's passion is not the same as strong as mine.
Right.
I was going 100 miles an hour and I got burnt out.
And the need is overwhelming.
Absolutely,
so,
absolutely. And so I would definitely always look for a team, never do anything alone, never ever do anything alone. So that's
awesome.
what I would do.
So you would say that, because I was about to ask you, what are the tools that you acquired during this process? What are the tools that you've used that have helped you to develop into this ministry and this outreach that you have?
The biggest thing that I would say is to use my resources and recognize and accept that I may be better than someone else, but there's always someone better than me.
Yeah, that's in everything in life.
Right.
That's like that.
Right, but many people don't see it like that. They get offended, or they feel they're not good enough. But I would definitely use my resources, and I maximize that.
Are there any books out there that you would recommend, or courses, or things that you've used to better yourself or grow into to become a better interpreter?
Well, as far as interpreting goes, yeah, I always recommend everyone to look into different workshops that are in the community. There's always workshops, especially Christian interpreters. I think that that's a deficit that we have as interpreters, is we're doing it for the Lord, so we don't feel the need to better ourselves. And I think that as interpreters and signers, that we need to do this in the spirit of excellence, not just because, well, this is for the Lord, then it's better than having nothing. It's not better than having nothing. We have to excel. We have to get better.
Excel, that's a great word. So what would be your best advice to someone that wants to start something like you've done?
The best advice I would say is find someone that's doing what you are already doing, or what you want to do.
That's very good.
Always surround yourself with people that are at the level you want to get to.
Exactly.
And get involved. Even if it's picking up chairs, picking up paper, whatever it is, just get involved.
Okay.
Serve.
So we're about to wrap up this little interview.
Okay.
What would be a question that I haven't asked so far that you would like to share with us about specifically what you do with the community or the church as far as working with the deaf community?
I would definitely encourage people to, if there's any deaf person that you know, send them somewhere. Go somewhere. Find out what's happening in the community, because a lot of deaf people don't have access to the gospel. There's only 2% of deaf people in the world that know about Jesus Christ. Because
2%?
2%. So they don't have access to that. So if anyone knows of a church that has interpreting, anyone knows of any program that has Christian interpreters, or even people that sign, connect with them, find resources for them so that the deaf people can have access, because they're very limited.
Wow, it's such a great task to just reach out and just get trained. Just find a way to learn a little bit. You don't have to do it perfectly, but at least if you take a step, that let them feel that, wow, you care.
Right.
You want to do something for me, and I think they appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So a couple more questions before I let you go.
Okay.
So one of them would be, what's one thing that you would say people don't know about you?
People don't know about me.
Something that can be shared, of course.
One of the biggest things is that I struggle being open and talking about me. Even though I'm very social and I'm very active, in reality I'm very quiet, I'm very mellow, I'm very much to myself. So
you don't say, seriously?
So being an interpreter where everyone's watching and everyone's looking, that's
it makes you like an outgoing person, right?
Right. It's very you're very extroverted, and I'm always out. But in reality, I like the peace and quiet, and I like to recharge separate from people. So that's different. So this is definitely what God's doing. as far as putting me out of my comfort zone and saying go.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And I hope it's going to be encouraging for people who believe that God has called them to do something but still struggle with their own personality to do things. So, and lastly, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how can they reach out to you without, of course, giving your phone number? But, you know, is there a way that they can get in contact with your website or an email that you want to give?
To get a hold of me, you can reach Silent Hope. So you can go to silent-hope.com, and that's directly to me, or even at Faith Assembly. If you do dim@faithassembly.org, that's an email that comes directly to me for the ministry. So you have the community outreach and you have the ministry.
Excellent.
The church.
So one of the things that we wanted to do with this interview, I think we achieved it, which is getting to know more about Marilú, her dreams, how she started. I'm pretty sure that there are people out there that may watch this video that they want to know, how can I get involved? How can I help? If you have questions, there you go. It's silent-hope.com. It's easy peasy there. And her email also, which is
dim@faithassembly.org.
There you go. So friends, we're going to show now the video of Volverte a Abrazar. It's going to have English captions, but also it's going to have Marilú making the sign interpretation. Is that the right word, right? Interpreting the song. So Marilú, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And even though Nani didn't want to come on camera, she will eventually in a Spanish version of this. One of these days, she's living like that. God bless you, and I hope you enjoy. And can you say something to the deaf community that be on the lookout for the video right now?
Watch the video. You're going to see it soon, right now. It's going to be exciting for you.
God bless you.